here. All of them.
The wind changed first. It came down off the ridge wrong, too warm for October, carrying a smell that didn't belong to sage or dust. The horses felt it before the men did. They pulled against their tethers, eyes rolling white, nostrils flared at something none of the riders could see yet. Then the moon came free of the clouds, and something screamed on the ridge line. Not a coyote, not a wolf. Nothing with a name the men in that posse wanted to say out loud. A sound too close to human to be mercy. One man dropped his rifle in the dirt and didn't pick it back up. "God help us," he whispered. "It's already here." Behind him, the land his friend had bought for $3 swallowed the last of the moonlight. Elias Cobb had never owned anything that mattered until the day he signed his name to a piece of paper for $3 and a parcel of land nobody else wanted. The land sat at the edge of the Whitcomb Basin, where the grass turned silver gray even in summer, and the creek ran quiet, too quiet like it was listening. Ranchers in the territory called it the Hollow, not out of poetry, but because two families had tried to settle it in the last decade, and both had left everything behind except their names on abandoned deeds. Nobody asked why. Everybody already knew better than to ask. Elias was 34, broad through the shoulders from a decade of railroad work, with hands that had learned to read wood grain and rope burn before they ever learned to hold a pen. He had a wife 2 years buried and a son, Thomas, 11 years old, who still woke some nights calling for a mother who wasn't coming back. Elias wanted more than anything else in his life a place that was theirs, not rented, not borrowed. Theirs. So when the land agent in Prescott mentioned, almost in passing, almost ashamed, that the Hollow could be had for next to nothing because the natives say it's spoiled, Elias didn't hesitate long. He rode out to the edge of the basin himself before signing anything. That was where he met the old man. He was tall for his age, though age had clearly worn deep grooves into him. A broad chest gone lean with years, a face that gave away nothing until it wanted to. He stood at the tree line like he'd been carved there, watching Elias's approach without moving to greet him or warn him off. A rifle rested loosely across his forearm, more habit than threat. "You're the one buying the Hollow," the old man said. It wasn't a question. "Aiming to, if it's for sale." "It's for sale." A pause long enough that Elias almost turned his horse around. $3, that's the price my people set. Not because it's worth so little. He looked past Elias toward the darkening tree line at the basin's edge. Because no one should pay more for what it will cost them. Elias should have asked what he meant. He didn't. He was thinking about Thomas, about 4 walls that couldn't be taken from him by a landlord's whim, about a creek that would never run dry. He thanked the old man, shook his offered hand, dry, strong, careful, and rode back to Prescott to sign the paper. It was only weeks later, after the cabin walls were up and the first frost had silvered the grass, that Elias learned the old man's name from a trader passing through Nantan Lupan. Once a respected elder among his people, now living apart from them on the far side of a line he seemed unwilling to cross. The trader said it careful, like the name itself might carry weight. He said the Hollow had a history older than any settler's memory. Something about a debt paid in blood, a curse laid down 2 generations back when a hunting party had wronged something in those hills that was never meant to be hunted. Elias laughed it off around the fire that night, more for Thomas's sake than his own conviction. Superstition, territory talk. The kind of story men told to keep others off good land. But he noticed, without meaning to, how the horses wouldn't graze past the tree line no matter how good the grass looked. How the creek went silent some nights, like something upstream had stopped it walking through. How Thomas, sharp-eyed and quiet since his mother's death, had started sleeping with his back to the window instead of facing it. And how, on the first full moon since they'd moved in, something had stood at the edge of their cleared land for the better part of an hour, tall, broad-shouldered, utterly still, watching the cabin with a patience that had nothing to do with hunger. Elias told himself it was a bear. He kept telling himself that for 3 more months, right up until the night the wind changed and the moon came free of the clouds and the hollow finally showed him what $3 had actually bought. The first sign wasn't blood. It was silence. Elias noticed it 3 days after the full moon, the absence of birdsong along the creek, the way even the wind seemed to move around the hollow instead of through it. He told himself the cold had driven the birds south early. He kept telling himself things like that. Then he found the fence line, 6 posts, torn clean from ground that hadn't been soft in weeks, scattered 30 feet apart like something had dragged them and lost interest. No blood, no tracks a man could read, just 4 indentations in the frost-hard dirt. Space too wide for any bear he'd ever heard of, and too deep for anything walking on 4 legs. He was still crouched over the marks, turning them over in his mind. When he heard the horse behind him, the rider didn't call out. He simply stopped at a respectful distance and waited, the way a man waits when he already knows what another man is looking at and doesn't need to ask. He was broad through the chest, weathered brown from a life spent outdoors, a Winchester resting easy across his saddle horn, not raised, not readied, just present, the way a good knife rests at a man's belt. Those posts didn't pull themselves, the rider said finally. No, Elias said. They didn't. The man swung down off his horse without being invited to. He crouched where Elias had crouched, studied the marks with the unhurried attention of someone who had seen this exact shape of trouble before and had decided a long time ago not to be afraid of it out loud. You're the one bought the hollow. I am. $3. It wasn't a question. Same as the old man's had not been a question months before. Man doesn't pay $3 for good land. Elias felt something tighten behind his rib. You knew, before I ever signed. Everybody in 40 miles knew. The rider stood, dusted his palms against his trousers, looked toward the tree line the way a man looks at a debt he owes but hasn't decided yet whether to pay. Wasn't my place to stop you. They didn't speak again for a while. The rider walked the fence line himself, slow, reading the ground the way Elias read woodgrain, like it was a language that told the truth, even when men didn't. He crouched again near the creek, touched the frost-silvered grass, and went very still. Whatever did this, he said, it didn't come for your fence post. And what did it come for? The rider looked at him, really looked for the first time the way a man looks at someone he's deciding whether to trust with something heavy. Your boy. He been sleeping right? Elias's stomach dropped. How do you know I have a boy? Everybody in 40 miles knows that too. A pause. This land remembers who wronged it. It doesn't forget easy, and it doesn't forgive at all. What's coming isn't hunting your fence line, Cobb. It's studying your family. Deciding. Deciding what? The rider didn't answer that. He mounted back up, gathered his reins, and for a moment Elias thought that was the whole of it. A stranger's warning, offered and withdrawn, same as the old man's had been. You want to keep that boy breathing, the rider said instead. You don't go out after dark. Not for cattle, not for curiosity, not for pride. And you don't shoot at anything you see standing upright in your yard that shouldn't be standing upright at all. He turned his horse. Wait, Elias called after him. I don't even know your name. The rider paused, just long enough to be a kindness rather than an accident. Ask me again, he said, when you've earned the answer. Then he was gone, back toward the tree line, leaving Elias alone with 6 torn fence posts and a silence that had teeth in it. That night, Thomas didn't sleep at all. Elias found him at the window near midnight, forehead against the cold glass, watching the dark tree line with the stillness of a boy who had already seen more than he'd told his father. Thomas, it looked at me, the boy said, not turning. 2 nights ago, through the window. It didn't come closer. It just looked like it was waiting on something. Elias's blood went to ice water. Why didn't you tell me? 'Cause you would have done something foolish. Thomas finally turned, and in the low lamplight he looked older than 11, older than his mother's death should have made him. And I don't think foolish is what this needs. Outside, far off toward the ridge, something moved through the dark with a patience that had nothing to do with an animal's hunger, and everything to do with a debt, 3 generations old, finally coming due. The cattle went first. Elias heard it before he understood it, a sound that didn't belong to any storm, any predator, any night he'd lived through in 34 years. Not quite a howl, something lower, wetter, threaded through with a growl that seemed to come from a chest far too broad to belong to anything that walked on 4 legs. He was out of bed before he'd finished waking, rifle in hand, boots half-laced. Thomas was already at the window again, and this time Elias didn't send him back to bed. Some part of him understood with the cold clarity of a man past pretending that keeping the boy blind wouldn't keep him safe. "Stay inside," Elias said. "Bar the door behind me. Papa, bar it." Outside, the moon hung low and full over the hollow, and the night had the wrong kind of quiet in it. The quiet of something holding its breath on purpose. Elias moved toward the corral with his rifle held low, not raised, not aimed, just carried. The way the rider on the ridge had carried his, he told himself that was caution. Some smaller, more honest part of him knew it was fear. He found the corral fence broken outward, not in. Something had come from inside the enclosure, not forced its way through from the tree line. 2 of his 3 cattle were gone entirely. Not a trace, not a sound, just empty space where warm animals had stood an hour before. The 3rd stood frozen against the far rail, eyes rolled white, legs trembling too hard to run. Then the moonlight shifted, and Elias saw it. It stood at the tree line where the old man had once stood to greet him, upright, impossibly upright, on 2 legs like a man wearing a shape that had never belonged to men. Broad through the shoulders in a way that dwarfed even Elias's railroad-hardened frame. Its arms hanging long and heavy, ending in hands that were wrong in a way his mind refused to fully catalog. Thick fur caught the moonlight in silver-gray ripples, and where its face should have offered some familiar geometry, there was only a wolf's elongated snout, still and watchful. Amber eyes fixed on him with an intelligence that had nothing animal left in it at all. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Its stillness said everything its violence hadn't yet needed to. Elias's hands remembered the rifle in them. He didn't raise it. Some instinct older than fear told him that raising it would end this differently than standing still would. "I didn't know," Elias said, and hated how small his voice sounded against the size of the thing across the yard. "When I bought this land, I didn't know what I was buying." The creature tilted its head the way a man might when weighing a debt against an excuse. For a long moment, nothing in the hollow moved at all. Not the wind, not the frightened animal against the rail, not Elias's own breath, caught somewhere behind his ribs. Then, as quietly as it had come, it turned and the tree line swallowed it whole. Elias stood in the ruined corral a long while before his legs remembered how to carry him back inside. He barred the door himself, checked the bar twice, and found Thomas sitting exactly where he'd left him, knees drawn to his chest, eyes wide, but dry. "You saw it," Thomas said, not a question. "I saw it. It didn't hurt you." Elias sat down heavily across from his son, the rifle set aside, forgotten. "No, it didn't, because it's not done deciding," Thomas said, and there was something in the boy's voice that didn't belong to an 11-year-old. Something old, something that had been listening to this land longer than either of them understood. "It's still watching us, like it's waiting to see what kind of men we are." Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat by the cold hearth, turning the rider's warning over and over in his mind. You don't shoot at anything you see standing upright in your yard that shouldn't be standing upright at all. And understood, with a dread that settled into his bones like winter, that he had been tested and had passed some part of it. But only some part. Come morning, he was riding out before the frost had lifted, back toward the tree line where he'd first met the man with no name. Because whatever was deciding his family's fate, Elias intended to understand the terms of the debt before it came due in full. Elias found him near the same ridge, as if the man had never left it, sitting his horse at the tree line with the patience of someone who had been expecting this exact return. "You came back sooner than most," the rider said. "It came to my corral last night. Stood there, looked at me like it was reading something off my face." Elias's voice was rough from the sleepless night behind it. "I need to understand what I'm dealing with, what my family's dealing with." The rider studied him a long moment, the same unhurried weighing Elias had felt from him the first time. Then, without a word, he swung down and gestured toward a fallen log at the tree line's edge. An invitation, or maybe another test. "My name is Robert Aldrich," he said once they were both seated. "And 30 years ago I rode with the hunting party that put a rifle ball through Nantan Lupin's brother." Elias went still. "We didn't know what he was. Nobody did then. He'd taken a wolf's shape, same as what visited your corral, hunting deer on land his family had hunted for 3 generations before any white man's boundary line ever touched it. We saw a wolf standing where a wolf shouldn't stand, upright, wrong, and we did what frightened men do. We shot first." Aldrich's jaw tightened. "He died in his brother's arms before sunup, and Nantan Lupin cursed the ground where it happened. Cursed it to hold that wrongness until a debt was paid that could balance what we'd taken. Why sell it then? Why not just leave it be, let it rot empty? Because empty land heals nothing." Aldrich looked toward the hollow, voice dropping lower. "Nantan Lupin didn't sell you cursed land to punish you, Cobb. He sold it to you because he was tired of watching it wait. He wanted to see one more time whether a man could stand on that ground and prove something different than what we proved 30 years ago. And if I fail that test?" Aldrich didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had gone quiet in a way that frightened Elias more than shouting would have. "Then your boy pays the same price my friend's brother paid. That's how the debt gets settled when it doesn't get settled the right way." Elias felt the ground tilt beneath him, though he hadn't moved. "What's the right way?" "I don't fully know. I've spent 30 years trying to learn it, and the land's never trusted me enough to show me." Aldrich met his eyes. "But I know this much. It isn't a bullet. Every family before you that reached for a gun, the hollow took something from them in return. I think it's watching to see if you'll reach for something else instead." They sat in silence, the wind moving cold and low across the ridge until Aldrich rose and gathered his horse's reins once more. "There's a full moon rising in 3 nights, he said. "Bigger than the last, closer. If the debt doesn't settle before then, I don't believe it settles gentle. Will you help me?" Aldrich paused, and for the first time since Elias had met him, something like grief moved across his weathered face. "I've been trying to help for 30 years, Cobb, and mostly what I've managed is watching. But I'll ride with you to Nantan Lupin's door, if you're willing to hear the rest of it from the man who's owed the debt, not just the man who watched it get made." They rode together through the afternoon, past the tree line, past the edge of Elias's own fear, until they reached a modest dwelling set back into the hills. Smoke rising thin from a chimney, a rifle resting against the door frame in the same careless, unthreatening way Elias remembered from their first meeting. Nantan Lupin stepped out before they'd even dismounted, as though he'd been listening for hoofbeats all day. "You've been to see Aldrich," he said. His eyes moved to Elias's face, reading something there, the way he'd read the land itself months before. "And now you understand what you bought. I want to know how to end it," Elias said. "Not with a gun. Something else." The old man's expression didn't soften, but something in his stillness changed. The stillness of a door easing open rather than staying shut. "Then come inside," Nantan Lupin said, "and bring your son with you tomorrow. Because the answer isn't mine to give alone. Some of it your boy already carries. Whether either of you understands that yet or not." Behind them, far off toward the hollow, the wind shifted again, warm and wrong for the season, carrying with it the first threads of a scent that had nothing to do with sage or dust. The full moon was 3 nights away, and something in the hills had already begun to wait. Nantan Lupin's cabin held its breath around them as Thomas sat wide-eyed, listening to a story that reached back further than either Cobb had ever imagined. "My brother's spirit didn't leave when his body did," the old man said, hands folded, voice steady with the calm of a grief 30 years worn smooth. "Settled into that ground because it had no other place to go. It has worn the shape you saw, hunting not for meat but for meaning, waiting for someone willing to see him as more than a monster in the dark." His eyes moved to Thomas, gentle now. Your boy dreamed of him before you ever signed that deed, didn't you, child?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I thought they were just dreams, a man standing at the tree line, sad eyes. He never came closer in them. He just waited. Because he recognized something in you," Nantan Lupin said. "A kindness your father carries, too, whether either of you has had cause to prove it yet. That recognition is the only door left open on this debt. Not blood, not rifles. Recognition, freely given from someone willing to stand still when every instinct says run or fight." Aldrich, silent until now, spoke low. 3 nights from tonight, the moon comes full. If Elias goes to that tree line and raises a weapon, the debt renews itself same as it did 30 years ago. But if he goes empty-handed, then my brother finally gets to choose rest over vengeance, Nantan Lupin finished. If a man proves at last that he can be trusted with what he was sold. 3 nights passed slower than any in Elias's life. On the final evening, as the moon climbed heavy and silver over the hollow, he walked to the tree line alone, rifle left leaning against the cabin wall behind him. The hardest choice he had made since burying his wife. Thomas watched from the window, forehead pressed to the glass exactly as he had months before. But this time Elias had asked him to stay, and this time Thomas had understood why. The creature came without sound, the way it always had. 7 feet of moonlit fur and old grief standing at the clearing's edge, amber eyes finding Elias's face across the frost-silvered grass. Elias's hands trembled at his sides, empty, deliberately empty, and he made himself hold the creature's gaze instead of looking away. "I didn't know what I bought," Elias said, voice steady despite everything in him screaming to run. "But I know now, and I'm not here to take anything else from you." The creature didn't move for a long moment, then, slow enough that Elias's heart nearly stopped from the sheer strangeness of it, it lowered itself. Not in submission, but in something closer to recognition, closer to release. Where a clawed hand had rested against the frost-hardened ground, it left behind a single curved claw, black as riverstone, half buried in the frozen dirt. When Elias looked up again, the tree line was empty. The wind had gone soft and warm, wrong for the season one final time, and then settled into something that felt for the first time since he'd signed that deed like peace. He knelt and picked up the claw with hands that had stopped shaking. Thomas met him at the cabin door, and neither of them said much that night. There wasn't much left to say. Elias set the claw on the mantel above the cold hearth, and it stayed there through every winter that followed, not as a trophy, not as a warning, but as a small, silent proof that a debt 3 generations old had finally, quietly, been paid. The hollow never troubled the Cobb family again. Cattle grazed the silver-gray grass without fear. The creek ran clear and unafraid of its own reflection. And on full moon nights, if Thomas woke and looked toward the tree line, he sometimes thought he saw a tall, broad-shouldered shape standing at the edge of the clearing. Not threatening, not hunting, just watching, the way a man watches over land he's finally been allowed to leave behind. Elias never spoke of the claw on the mantel, but he never took it down either. Some debts, once paid, deserve to be remembered rather than forgotten. A reminder that the deepest curses aren't always broken by strength, but by the rare courage to stand still, empty-handed, and choose to see rather than destroy. If this story kept you up past when you meant to sleep, that's exactly where we like you. Subscribe to Werewolf Stories and tell us where in the world you're listening from, because the next tale waiting in these hills is already circling the fire, ready to be told.